Yes.
Good afternoon. Can we please call the case?
Case this afternoon is Sharon E. McDaniel, appealing spouse, and David D. McDaniel, non-appealing spouse. Case number 180-10796.
Thank you. And Ms. McDaniel, are you on the line?
Yes, I am.
Okay, thank you very much. And is it okay to address you as Ms. McDaniel? It's just a lot of parties here.
Yep.
Okay, thank you. I am John O. Johnson. I'll be the lead administrative law judge for today's hearing. With me today are Judge Hosey and Judge Lund.
Good afternoon.
And let me have the parties introduce themselves. Ms. McDaniel, can you one more time just say hello to us?
Hello, this is Sharon McDaniel.
Thank you. And appellant's representative.
Kenneth Curry for TAP.
Okay, and make sure you talk into the microphone, especially with the telephonic presence. I'm not sure exactly what all she hears. And for Franchise Tax Board?
Brad Catino and Marguerite Monnier for the Franchise Tax Board.
Thank you. And Mr. McDaniel?
David McDaniel, the non-appealing spouse.
Thank you. And it's okay if I refer to you as Mr. McDaniel instead of non-appealing spouse?
Of course.
Just to make it quicker. Thank you. First, we're going to do a little bit of off-the-record work. It may take about 10 minutes since it's more of a complicated case as far as the number of parties. Once we're done with all that, then we'll go on the record and start the fun part. First, I want to go over the scheduling of who's going to speak when and how long they're going to have. And this is all confirmed from the pre-hearing conference minutes and orders. It's going to begin with Mr. Curry having 2 minutes for an opening statement. After that, we'll have 10 to 15 minutes for Mrs. McDaniel to testify. I believe she has a prepared opening statement that's been distributed to the parties and the judges. And part of that time, Mr. McCurry, you're also going to ask her questions. Is that correct?
Correct.
Okay. After she testifies, we will allow questions from Mr. McDaniel and then Franchise Tax Board and then the judges. For the parties, you're allowed 5 to 10 minutes to provide questions to the witness after she testifies. Once Ms. McDaniel is done with her testimony and questions, we will go to Mr. Curry to present his case. He'll have 20 minutes. Then we'll go to Mr. McDaniel for 20 minutes and Franchise Tax Board for 20 minutes. Mr. McDaniel, as part of your presentation today, are you going to testify as to facts as well as arguments?
Yes.
Okay. So what we'll do is we'll swear you in just like we will for Ms. McDaniel. And you can just provide everything all at once, the 20 minutes of facts and legal arguments. And then once you're done, we will allow both of the other two parties to ask you questions as well with a 5 to 10 minute limit.
Okay. Is there any consequences to perjury?
Well, you will be sworn under oath. So
I understand that. I'm just asking. I'm not going to lie, but I'm just asking because...
I just ask that you do tell the truth if you swear and affirm to tell the truth. I'm not sure exactly what the repercussions would be, but we'll cross that bridge if we have to.
Okay.
After Franchise Tax Board provides their arguments, we will have 5 minutes for closing statements from each party, and we'll go in reverse order. Franchise Tax Board, Mr. McDaniel, and then Mr. Curry. And one part is skipped. Right before closing statements, the judges may ask questions about your legal arguments and positions. Depending on how long this takes, I'm going to check in about the 1 hour mark to see if we need to take a break or if anybody needs to answer some questions or just to take a time out for a minute, even our stenographer, but I'm sure she's more capable and keep going. But let me know at any time also if you need a break or if you have any procedural questions. We are going to try to stay on track as much as possible. There are a lot of moving parts here. But please feel free to interrupt me if you have procedural questions. And also I may interrupt you if we start getting off track or if I think something is not going according to plan. As I mentioned, I will be the lead judge for the purpose of conducting this hearing. But my two judges alongside me are equal co-decision makers. We have read all the briefs and examined the exhibits. I'd like to note that OTA is an independent agency, Office of Tax Appeals is an independent agency. Therefore, our decision is going to be based on the exhibits and arguments provided in your briefs that will be admitted as evidence, as well as your testimony and arguments provided today. So if you have something that's been going on a long time, 20 years, I think, since the actual tax year. So if you have anything that's happened along the way that isn't currently in the record, we will not have that when we're making our decisions. So make sure you provide everything that you want us to consider today. The issue we have on appeal is whether Ms. McDaniel has shown that FTB erred in granting innocent spouse relief to Mr. McDaniel for the 1999 tax year. Does that sound correct, Mr. Curry?
Yes.
Okay. And were there any other issues that you were trying to argue today?
I see potential for a few to come up, but no. At this point, no.
All right. Does that sound correct, Franchise Tax Board?
Yes.
Oh, thank you. And Mr. McDaniel, does that sound accurate to you?
Yes.
Thank you. So there were several exhibits in this matter. We've tried to organize them and label them according to the exhibit log that you all received today. Everything on this log has already been provided to the parties previously through briefing or submissions more than 15 days prior to this hearing. So nothing on here is actually new. This log here is just a matter of all of us staying organized as we conduct the hearing. And in case anyone wants to reference a specific exhibit, I do ask that they refer to the number or letter on the left side of this chart so that we all know exactly what exhibit we're talking about. Mr. Curry, did you have any new exhibits today?
I do not, Judge.
Thank you. And Franchise Tax Board, did you have new exhibits?
We do not.
And Mr. McDaniel, do you have any new exhibits?
No, I do not.
Thank you. Mr. Curry, did you have any objections to the exhibits on the log?
Other than my objection at the pre-hearing conference, no other objections.
Okay.
Thank you.
If there is any exhibit that's referenced along the way that you have a specific objection to, whether it's relevancy or otherwise, please feel free to let me know when it comes back to you on your next turn to speak. Franchise Tax Board, do you have any objections to the exhibits?
We do not have any objection.
Thank you. And Mr. McDaniel, any objections?
No, but they're numbered differently, so I may have to fumble through a little bit to get them up to speed with you.
Sure, that makes sense. The fourth column there is brief location. I've tried to label it as you had labeled it when you submitted it.
Perfect. Okay, that answers that. Thank you.
Right, great. Once we go on the record, I will admit these into evidence, noting that there's no objections at that time. And when we go on the record, we'll also restate the issue, and we'll also all reintroduce ourselves just for the record. I do want to make a final statement before we move on towards that. Just reiterating that there are a lot of moving parts to this hearing, including participation of 3 parties. We have a telephonic presence for testimony. The facts that will be discussed will likely be very personal in nature, and emotions may be elevated. But I want to remind everyone that our goal here today is not to air grievances or pursue private motives, but instead the goal is helping this panel of 3 judges decide the issue on appeal, whether Mr. McDaniel is entitled to relief from a joint tax liability based on the California provision of law known as innocent spouse relief. So please remember that everything you're presenting today and asking today is for the benefit of the 3 judges up here. Because of this, I'll also be very focused on maintaining our schedule of who talks when, and I'll be attentive to keeping all discussions relevant to the issues before us. To this effort, I just ask each party to speak during their allotted times only. Unless you have a procedural question for me, then feel free to let me know. And also, as I mentioned, when referring to the exhibits, try to refer to the numbers on the left-hand side so we all know what we're talking about. Before we go on the record, let me ask Mr. Curry, do you have any questions before we start?
I guess just one with respect to the order of the sequence of events. With Mr. McDaniel saying that he's going to be providing testimony as well as any legal arguments, and because Mrs. McDaniel or Ms. McDaniel will be answering questions first, I would like to perhaps have an opportunity for rebuttal or clarifying questions at the end. Is that possible?
Yeah, we'll allow you 5 minutes at the end of Ms. McDaniel's testimony just to have some follow-up questions, if that's what you're asking for.
Following the other
questions. Thank you. Ms. McDaniel, on the phone, did you have any questions about the procedure?
No, I do not.
Thank you. Franchise Tax Board, any questions?
We don't have any questions, but I just want to note that Michael Cornez is also here for the Franchise Tax Board, and I'll be introducing him when we go on the record.
Okay, thank you. Do you anticipate that he will be coming up to speak?
It's possible.
Okay. In that scenario, we might have to shift some of the seats around, play a little hot,
Sure.
moving chairs there. Thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. McDaniel, do you have any other questions before we go on the record?
No.
Thank you. Is the panel ready?
Ready?
Ready to proceed?
All right. And our stenographer is ready. Okay. We are now going on the record. This is the appeal of Sharon E. McDaniel, case number 1801-0796. It is 1:15 p.m. on June 26, 2019, here in beautiful Sacramento, California. I am the lead ALJ for this hearing, John O. Johnson, and let me say good afternoon to my fellow co-panelists today. Good afternoon, Judge Hosey.
Good afternoon.
And good afternoon, Judge Lund.
Good afternoon, Judge Johnson.
And let me have the parties introduce themselves for the record, beginning with Ms. McDaniel.
This is Sharon McDaniel.
Thank you. And her representative?
Kenneth Curry from the Tax Appeals Assistance Program.
Thank you. And Franchise Tax Board?
Brad Catino, Marguerite Monnier, and Michael Cornez for the Franchise Tax Board.
Thank you. And Mr. McDaniel?
David McDaniel, the non-appealing spouse.
Thank you. Oh, please make sure.
David McDaniel, the non-appealing spouse.
Thank you. The issue today is whether Ms. McDaniel has shown that FTB erred in granting innocent spouse relief to Mr. McDaniel for the 1999 tax year, and FTB does refer to the Franchise Tax Board. The exhibits that have been provided on appeal include the appealing spouse's exhibits 1 through 4, respondent's exhibits A through P, and the non-appealing spouse's exhibits NS1 through NS25. We have no objections to those exhibits at this time, and they will be admitted as evidence. Okay, to start, we have Mr. Curry going to provide us an opening statement, expected to be approximately 2 minutes. I think you're aware of what an opening statement is, but just a reminder, we're not arguing the case in chief or presenting new evidence, just giving us a roadmap of what you will show us today, and ending with a ruling on this appeal that you desire. When you are ready, please begin.
As we all know, taxes are a part of every person's life. People make mistakes in filing tax returns, and those mistakes often affect other people, like spouses with whom taxpayers often file joint tax returns. We often file joint tax returns for the tax benefits of such an arrangement. For example, even when a joint tax return, when a joint tax return recognizes income from only one spouse, the other spouse counts as a dependent, and the joint return benefits both taxpayers by having an additional standard deduction. Likewise, spouses will often use the joint return to account for losses or expenses of one kind or another, deductions, often business losses or expenses, against the income reported on the tax return. All parties to the joint return benefit from the deductions taken against all the income reported. It stands to reason then that the party with the most income benefits the most from the deductions. The rest of it I think we'll cover in questions, and I would just say that obviously we're hoping for a reversal of the granting of innocent spouse relief to Mr. McDaniel.
Thank you. Up next, we do have Ms. McDaniel's testimony. We'll put you under oath before you begin, Ms. McDaniel. And I believe you will start with a prepared statement. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay. Let me ask you, do you solemnly swear or affirm to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
Yes, I do.
Okay. Please begin.
Okay. Good afternoon. I have never disputed making an accounting error. It was an honest mistake. David and I left for our wedding December 24th, 1998. I hurriedly vouched all I could for the end of the year, as I would not return until January 1999. Then in 1999, I accidentally vouched the same invoices, resulting in the additional taxes. I was commuting each week from Visalia to Hayward, 3 hours each way, staying in Hayward all week and heading home on the weekends. I became pregnant 3 months after we got married, and I continued to commute to Northern California while I was pregnant until October 1999, then closed my Hayward office and tried to work from home, But with the newborn, I soon realized I had to give up my business. There was a lot going on that year, and I made an honest mistake. David benefited from not only the income I earned during our marriage, but also in the loss of business profit, which greatly helped our tax returns as he was making over $100,000. My business paid off his Dodge truck, which was approximately $7,000, and also paid for the Visalia Country Club membership, which was approximately $16,000. David played golf almost if not every day at the country club for at least the first 3 to 4 years of the membership. The accountant who prepared the taxes did not catch the error either. As I said, it was an honest mistake. I was hastily preparing the year-end books, preparing for a wedding, moving to a new city, all within 1 week. Then getting pregnant, commuting, trying to run the business. There was a lot going on. As a couple, we were both responsible for the IRS audit. We were both responsible for the additional IRS taxes and should both be responsible for the California state income tax as well. David benefited not only in the money I made with the business, but also benefited when the business showed a loss to offset his six-figure income, resulting in refunds. Thank you.
Thank you. And then we'll move to questions for Mr. Curry of Ms. McDaniel.
Okay, so first question. Why have you not produced any of the documentation regarding the 1999 tax return?
Because David has all that information.
Okay. And all of that information was in where? In the house that you lived in together?
Correct.
Okay, so when you left, when you separated, you didn't take any documentation with you. It stayed with the house.
That is correct. I left everything there.
So in your opening statement, you reiterated that Mr. McDaniel benefited from your income when you paid off his truck and paid for the club membership that he used extensively. From the numbers you estimated, the total comes to around $23,000, as an interesting fact, about the cost of an average car, or about the average cost of a car of around $1999 to $2,000. Has Mr. McDaniel ever repaid these amounts?
No, he has not.
And to your recollection, these payments are recorded in your divorce decree, and the judge did not object or did not find to the contrary?
I don't know if those payments were the payments for the membership and his truck.
Okay, we'll come back to that if we need to.
Okay.
This is going to sound a little harsh, but do you have other close personal friends that accuse you of fraud and think you ought to spend 2 lifetimes in prison?
No, I do not.
Okay. And to the best of your recollection, since the documents have been withheld from you, did you incur substantial deductions from your businesses in tax years 1998 and 1999? Those are the years that were the subject of the 2002 IRS audit.
Yes, I did.
Okay. And in both of those years, again, to the best of your recollection, was Mr. McDaniel's income greater than yours?
Yes, very much so.
And do you recall if Mr. McDaniel had only wage income, or did he have other income or gain from another source during those 2 years?
He had gain from the sale of a house in 1998.
I'm sorry, in addition to his wage income?
Correct.
And the wage income was greater than your income for that year?
Absolutely.
So the deductions that came from your business activity, they significantly lowered what would have been Mr. McDaniel's tax bill because you contributed the deductions, had the two of you not filed jointly. Is that question clear?
Yes, it's clear, and that is correct.
Okay. And so when did you become aware of the state's 1999 tax liability adjustment?
Not until 2016.
And that's after your divorce?
Correct. Our divorce was final in 2014.
And prior to when you became aware of it in 2016, this is going to sound a little bit redundant, but did you receive any notices from FTB about this tax liability adjustment?
No, I did not.
Because you didn't become aware of it until 2016. Okay.
Correct.
So until you received notice of Mr. McDaniel's application for innocent spouse relief, had you seen the notice of proposed assessment or been made aware of its existence?
No, I had no idea.
So you became aware of the revised assessment or the assessment after the revised, after the state of California revised your income tax return. You became aware of this assessment as a result of the innocent spouse relief application.
Correct.
And has Mr. McDaniel ever discussed it with you prior to your becoming aware of it through the innocent spouse relief application?
No. No.
And did the 1999 tax liability to the state of California ever come up in the divorce settlement proceedings?
No, they did not.
When did you and Mr. McDaniel stop filing joint tax returns?
The last, I believe, since Mr. McDaniel has them all, but I believe the last one we filed jointly was in 2002.
And why did you stop filing joint returns?
Because he was fired, and I believe it was 2003, and started his own business. And whenever we talked about filing taxes, I always asked him for receipts and things so I could help with the taxes, and I never got anything. So nothing was ever filed for years and years and years.
Okay, and did you and Mr. McDaniel share joint bank accounts in 99 and 2000?
Yes, we did.
Okay. And did you stop using joint bank accounts at some point?
Yes, I believe it was right before we separated in 2010. So maybe 2009. I'm not positive on that, though.
Okay. And other than the obvious answer of the separation, why did you stop using joint checking or bank accounts?
Actually, Mr. McDaniel opened his own personal account without me knowing. So I don't know why he did that.
During the period that you did have joint bank accounts, did you ever prevent Mr. McDaniel from accessing those accounts or any records from them?
No, not at all.
Did you and Mr. McDaniel use the same tax accountant prior to your marriage?
Yes, we did.
So Mr. McDaniel was acquainted with and used the services of the same accountant you used prior to your marriage?
That is correct.
And that's the same accountant that filed, at the very least, the 1998 and 1999 tax returns, which were the subject of the IRS audit?
Correct.
And did you ever attempt to prevent Mr. McDaniel from contacting your accountant?
No, not at all.
Did you attempt to prevent Mr. McDaniel from inquiring about any information pertaining to your tax returns, Mr. Daniel's tax returns, or your joint returns at any time before, during, or after your marriage to Mr. McDaniel?
No, I did not.
Your accountant actually played an important sort of minor part in your marriage to Mr. McDaniels. Is that right?
Yes, that is correct.
And tell us about that.
We had both been using the same accountant for years, and when my divorce from my first husband was final in April of 1998, I had my taxes done through the accountant, Bill McAvoy, and when I went to see him, I told him that I had gotten divorced, and he said that David had asked about me, and would it be okay for him to give David my phone number? And I said, well, can I get his address? And I ended up writing David a letter. And then we got together when David came back to pick up his taxes. I believe it was around April 13th. So we started dating around the 13th, which was after my divorce was final from my first husband.
But that wasn't the first time that the two of you had dated, is that correct?
That is correct. David and I had dated back in either 1984 or 1985. But it ended because he was a little possessive and controlling.
All right. That's the end of my questions at this point, Judge.
Thank you. Let me turn to Mr. McDaniel. You will have 5 to 10 minutes for any questions that you may have.
You realize you are under oath, correct?
Absolutely. As are you.
In the court documentations, it shows that tax lien was part of the documentation, so you knew about it. You had to. It was part of the court order, and I will show that later on. If I was to give you, or if I was to ask you to give me $100,000, and then I give you $7,000 worth of write-offs, how many times would you do that before you realize that you're not benefiting anything? If you lose $93,000 every time we exchange $100,000, how many times is it going to take before you realize that you're losing money?
I'm sorry, but is this relevant to
Is that a question?
Yes.
Let me ask Mr. McDaniel. I think you're sort of asking hypotheticals and questions where the answer might be obvious that you're looking for.
Uh-huh.
Let's try to focus on questions that look for factual answers rather than hypotheticals or questions that don't need an answer.
Okay. According to your tax returns for 1998, what was your profit or loss?
You probably have my tax returns. All I have from your exhibits is my Schedule C, and I am trying to find it, but it's right there, so I don't have it handy unless I scroll through all these pages.
May I just ask, is this in the record so that we can all look at it?
Yes.
Okay.
I'll tell you as soon as I find it. It just
Okay. There's a lot.
I went by letters, and then she said they go by letters, so go by numbers.
Right.
And I went by numbers, and now everything's by letters, even the ones that I did. So I know what those.
Mr. McDaniel, are you looking for the Schedule C or are you looking for a different document? From
I'm looking
1998?
for the tax returns that.
It looks like it's NS 10. So it looks like it was 10 is the 1998 Schedule C, I think you might be referring to.
I believe that's the only 1998 tax return document I recall being exhibits.
No, there's.
Was it a more recent exhibit that was
Yeah.
contributed?
Yes.
I know that I've seen it too.
And what is it we're looking for?
The 1998.
I think it's this one. It looks like number 7. The
Is
profit
it
or
the one
loss.
you have number 7?
Probably so. Yeah.
Is this what you're looking for right here?
Yes.
Okay. This is 1998.
I believe it's marked as number 7.
Seven, okay.
It's
I'm almost
my
there.
list is number 7, and I don't see
Oh,
I think it's
okay,
number
maybe
10
this-
on
is it
the-
this one?
7Z.
There it
I
is.
don't know.
Yeah.
It was
Okay.
13 pages? 'Cause
Yes, I am.
We can go off the record for a minute while we find the document. Thank you. Yeah. I see
It's in my number 7,
to your hearing exhibits, I believe,
my hearing exhibits.
which is also your NS10. I believe it's the same document.
That's
If we
what
can-
it.
If you want to look at those two.
Yeah.
Okay, right. That's what number
I think he marked it as number 7.
I know he
Oh.
did.
Yeah,
And is the question, Mr. McDaniel, regarding an amount that was listed on the return?
Yeah, it's on that return.
Okay. Do you want to ask the question again then, based on that return, and we'll go back on the record?
Okay. According to your tax return for 1998, what was your profit or loss?
The loss was $93,481.
Okay. For the year 2000, what was your profit or loss? It's 2 pages later.
The 2000 return is not a part of the appeal. Is this relevant?
Yes, it is.
Okay, I know you think it is.
I'm sorry.
We're going to allow it. Mr. McDaniel, you will have no more than 10 minutes, so make sure you ask the questions you want to ask, but I'm going to let you continue on this path.
Okay.
Is it the one we filed jointly, so $85,618? Is that what you're looking at?
No, it's the negative $20,000. But
Business income or loss? I didn't have my business in 2000. I don't believe.
Okay. Well, there should be a Schedule C or something to go with that number to reveal what it's involved. So if we don't have the Schedule C, I'm not sure what the point of this question is.
Thanks.
What we have is
Thanks. We can continue with the questions at this point. But thank you. We understand. When you're ready, Mr. McDaniel.
okay. You brought up the first time we dated. I guess that's irrelevant now, but since you claimed that I was possessive and controlling, what was the real reason for the departure? Or our breakup?
In the first one?
Yes.
I just told you were possessive and controlling.
Okay. The reason we left is because you were cheating.
David McDaniel.
It's a fact. Mr. McDaniel, if you want to state your own facts. If you don't believe that she's telling the truth, you'll have your time under testimony to state your own facts. Okay. So you can just move on, make a note to yourself that you want to address that when you testify.
Okay. There's nothing else I can ask because she's not going to tell the truth, so there's no point.
Okay, thank you. Franchise Tax Board, did you have any questions for the witness?
I have a couple questions.
Yes, please, Ms. Monahan.
Thank you. Ms. McDaniel, this is Marguerite Meunier from the Franchise Tax Board. I think you testified that during 1999, you and Mr. McDaniel had joint bank accounts. Did you have those for the entire year? That's the first part of my question. And the second question is, were they personal bank accounts or were they business bank accounts?
I had a separate account for my business, and then we had joint accounts. I don't know, and honestly, we got married January 1st, 99, so it may have overlapped that we had our own personal accounts for a short time in our own name, but I know I had my business account through 99, I believe, maybe into 2000 a little bit.
All right, and that business account was a separate account, and it was your account?
Correct.
Okay, good.
Correct.
That's all my questions. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Curry, did you have any follow-up questions you'd like to ask?
no follow-up questions. Thank you.
Thank you. Then when you're ready, you can begin with your 20 minutes of arguments. Oh, sorry. Before we leave, Ms. McDaniel, there is time for the panel to ask questions. Judge Leon, did you have a question?
Yes, for Ms. McDaniel.
Yes.
Yes, thank you. I'd like to take you back to, I guess, the year 2000 when you would have filed your 1999 return. How, if you recall, how does that process work? Do you contact your accountant? Your accountant contacts you? How does that work?
I believe we contacted the accountant to make an appointment to take all the paperwork to him.
And that happens towards the deadline, April 15th, later on in October, or early on in the year, in February? When did you do that back in 2000?
I believe we did it right around the 15th of April.
Okay. And when the accountant is done and is ready for it to go out, what happens at that point? He calls you and asks you to come down to sign them? Is that what happens?
Usually, I know we dropped them off one year, and we probably just went back and forth and picked them up, or he could have mailed them. Honestly, I don't remember.
I'm just trying to figure out. Well, do you guys actually talk to the accountant before you sign, or does he just hands them off to you and you just sign them?
Oh no, we met with him and go over things. Yeah.
Okay. Okay. Thank you.
Okay.
You're
Judge
welcome.
Hosey? I don't have any questions at this time. Mr. Curry, was there any follow-up question based on Judge Leon's question?
No, thank you.
Thank you. Okay, then you may begin with your argument.
All right. A couple things to get out of the way first about presumptions. Respondent FTB enjoys the presumption of correctness in their determination, but that this is a rebuttable presumption, and when evidence, under the law, when evidence is presented that contradicts that assumption or that presumption, the presumption disappears and the arguments have to be weighed against the evidence. There's no longer an enjoyment of that presumption. There's a lot of evidence here that contradicts the presumption. There's also another presumption at work here. It's also well settled in the law that the evidence that is within the possession of a party, within the possession and control of a party to a controversy, and that party does not provide that evidence, especially after it's been asked for twice, the evidence is presumed to be unfavorable to that party. Mr. McDaniel is clearly withholding a substantial amount of evidence. Provided individual pages from a range of tax years. So he has those tax returns. And a lot of other irrelevant and defamatory material, but somehow he cannot provide the most important document, the 1999 tax return. He has not even claimed that he doesn't have it. Instead, he asserts, quote, "I'm not hiding 1999. I just have so much paperwork spread from the divorce decree that it is still being worked on. I do not have it handy." And that comes from, I don't know how I'm going to reference that document. I guess we can find it if anybody wants to see it.
You can tell me the location. Was that in a brief, or is that in a document that was provided to Office of Tax Appeals, Franchise Tax Board? Where was it?
And yeah, it was in one of the document dumps or provisions to the FTB and OTA.
Okay.
I have it.
In the form of an email? Is that what you're saying?
I'm sorry?
Was it in the form of an email?
No, it's one of the documents. It's in one of the letters. Let me find it for you real quick. It's actually in one of the cover letters. I can tell you the date. So this was in a collection of exhibits that was received. It's marked received by OTA on October 16th, 2018. I'm not sure how I can cross-reference with this list.
Right, we have that listed as Mr. McDaniel's additional brief, where he listed exhibits 1Z, 2A, 9Z, etc. It was on one of the first pages. Is that what you're stating?
Right, on page 2.
Okay, that's sufficient for me. Thank you.
Okay, well, it's there. Okay. All right, but he does have handy documents about personal loans and tax returns that do not pertain to him, nor do they belong to him. He has those, but not the most critical piece of evidence in this appeal and in the application for the innocent spouse relief. If Mr. McDaniel cannot be troubled to find the 1999 tax return, did he provide it to FTB for his innocent spouse relief application? If not, how did FTB arrive at a conclusion without it, especially after stating in a letter to Mr. McDaniel that he must provide it? This is Respondent's Exhibit H. And if he did provide the 1999 tax return to FTB, why hasn't FTB provided it to appellant? We've requested it twice. And Ms. McDaniel has a right to that information. If Mr. McDaniel did not submit the return, how could any analysis be conducted by FTB as required, at least by Subdivision C relief, which requires an allocation of benefit as a result of the disallowed deduction without the return? How could that analysis be done? If any analysis was conducted at any point regarding any matter resulting from Mr. McDaniel's innocent spouse relief application, what documents or what information informed that analysis? We've asked for all the documents related to that, and we have received nothing except a 2-page summary. Appellant has requested on 2 occasions, including a request that OTA issue a subpoena for all the documents provided to FTB for or with the innocent spouse relief application. The only information provided, again, was the summary of the findings from the innocent spouse program, the subject matter experts on this issue. Does this mean that FTB relied on 0 documentation to arrive at its conclusion for relief? Twice. 2 separate analyses or 2 separate determinations? Or is it withholding documentation to which the appellant has a right to have? It's very difficult to believe FTB had no documentation. So it is clear that both Respondent and Mr. McDaniel have withheld evidence. Evidence they both possess and is entirely within their control to provide. Therefore, the required presumption under the law is that both Respondent and Mr. McDaniel are concealing information that is damaging to their claims and conclusions. Anything that results from this appeal that disfavors Ms. McDaniel results from these conditions: that both Mr. McDaniel and Respondent are concealing evidence, documentation that has been asked for. By definition, as a matter of law, derives from a deliberate withholding of evidence, evidence to which Ms. McDaniel has a right to have. There were 2 determinations by FTB, one through their innocent spouse program, one by Mr. Coutinho, who I met today. They came up with different conclusions. The innocent spouse program held that of the 3 options for relief, B and C, subdivisions B and C, Mr. McDaniel did not qualify for. They went to subdivision F, which is sort of a catch-all. For any inequitable reason, he should be granted relief. There are some conditions, and I don't believe that he's met them. Another component of FTB, Mr. Coutinho has conducted a second evaluation of the claims or request for innocent spouse relief. He came up with a different conclusion, that Mr. McDaniel qualifies for all 3, except that that's not permitted. Subdivision F is only available if B and C are not. It cannot be all 3. Mr. McDaniel has made a lot of statements. Very little of them are backed up with any kind of documentation. Revenue Taxation Code 18533. That's a long regulation or statute. Under subdivision B, it requires that the individual filing the joint return establishes, this is Mr. McDaniel, as requesting innocent spouse relief, establishes that in signing the return he or she did not know of and had no reason to know of that understatement. That has not been established. He has asserted it, but there's no documentation that shows he establishes he had no reason to know. In fact, in his application, on page 3 of his application, part 3 of the innocent spouse application asks for the applicant to tell us if and how you were involved with financing and preparing returns for those tax years. Question number 14, when the returns were filed, what did you know about any incorrect information or missing information? 2 boxes are checked, and there's an explanation. The box is checked for, you knew something was incorrect or missing, and asked about it. Explained below. The box is also checked for, you did not know anything was incorrect or missing. In the explanation box, Mr. McDaniel states, Sharon was handling the tax details. I signed the tax forms under the assumption that all was correct. When the refund tax due for the years were being held to pay back taxes, I was told, this is the facts, I'm so sorry. I was told it would be done in a year. After 3 years, the returns were still being held to pay back taxes. So something was amiss, or at least he believed it was, going on. I asked about it, but Sharon was very offensive, I think defensive is probably the right word, and argumentative about the subject. That should have been a clue to an ordinary taxpayer. That should have been a clue.
And just to clarify, that is Exhibit H from Franchise Tax Board's exhibit that you're reading from.
I believe
G,
it's
sorry,
G.
G. Sorry, thank you.
Right, G, that's correct. Page 5. Another problem with the subdivision B and C relief is that those are electable. An applicant is required to elect for those. Is that a better way to say it? An applicant must elect for those possibilities of relief. And I'm not sure that there's any election indicated that he intended for those opportunities of relief. Lacking any substantial evidence, there is no establishing that Mr. McDaniel did not know or did not have any reason to know, and in fact his own testimony in the application suggests otherwise. Still, let me back up. All 3 offers of innocent spouse relief require, among many things, several things, that the applicant not be aware of and have no reason to be aware of any problems with the tax returns. He must be innocent. But the conclusions by 2 different components of FTB have been very generous in accepting his assertions without any documents to back them up. And no consideration has been given to Mrs. McDaniel's statements, which are in direct contravention to Mr. McDaniel's statements. That seems obvious. part of the analysis for whether innocent spouse relief should be granted is the impact that it would have on the applicant. Would it create a financial hardship? This requires an analysis of Mr. McDaniel's financial situation. I don't believe that's been done. If it has been done, I'd like to see it. But Mr. McDaniel's own evidence, which he has submitted, his bank statements and his work history, demonstrate that he does spend money on overdraft fees and airfare, at least to come here. Money which he could spend on paying down this tax liability. So it is not fair to say that a financial situation is creating a need for this relief. Two more issues quickly. First, whether or not Mr. McDaniel knew or should have known. Obviously, in the record, there's some evidence that he should have known. The arguing or whatever it was between them, in the case law, it is evident that is a signal that should be obeyed, or excuse me, should be attended to. The taxpayer has a duty to inquire. You cannot simply say, I don't know, I didn't know, I didn't see it, I'm innocent. You cannot willfully be ignorant and not ask questions, particularly when there are signals that there could be something wrong. That is not an acceptable excuse in the case law for innocent spouse relief. Finally, in the last round of documents, get to it real quick, in the very last page, is a long list, we can find it, I guess, is a long list of monies that Mr. McDaniel would like to get back from Ms. McDaniel and, I don't know, probably FTB too. Something like $80,000. And on the innocent spouse relief application itself, the box is checked for, do you want a refund? Yes, the box is checked yes for, do you want a refund? And there are a number of tax years listed on this application. What's happening here is more than just innocent spouse relief for tax year 1999. All those monies Mr. McDaniel wants back, he's asking for a workaround for an expired statute of limitations on refunds. He's asking for a refund. Whatever the statute of limitations on innocent spouse relief, the refund statute of limitations expired a long time ago. And for all of those reasons, the granting of innocent spouse relief should be reversed.
Thank you, Mr. Curry.
Thank you.
To clarify, I think that last exhibit you're talking about is the last page in our exhibits. It's NS25, page 52. Can you verify that that's the document you're referencing?
It's just like a spreadsheet that has a series of amounts on it with date, code, amount, total. Is that what you guys are looking at?
Yeah.
The total amount is $82,748.85.
Oh, yes, that's correct.
Okay.
All right. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Curry. We're not quite at an hour yet, but let me ask, does anybody feel like they need a break or a rest?
Yes, can we take a brief?
Sure, let's take a 10-minute break.
Thank you.
We'll come back at 2:05.
Thank
We'll
you.
go off the record.
On the
we're back on the record. Franchise Tax Board, are you ready to proceed with the hearing?
Yes, we're ready.
All right, thank you. What we have up next is Mr. McDaniel to provide your testimony and argument. Before we begin, we will swear you in at the same oath that we used prior. If you could please stand and raise your right hand. And do you solemnly swear or affirm to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do.
Thank you. You have 20 minutes, and you can begin when you're ready.
Okay, thank you. In regards to the 1999 taxes, I didn't have them for months because in the divorce, we hadn't done our taxes for many years and I'll show you why in a moment, but there was a lot of tax fraud that happened prior to us getting married that I did not know about, and that's part of the innocent spouse thing, and I understand that it's very frustrating and emotional, but the facts are the facts. A lot of these are just single pages, like Mr. Curry said, and we'd have 500, 600 pages here, so it's to the point and concise. If there's anything you need, I can probably get it. The issue was the Internal Revenue Service came back and re-audited Sharon's personal business account, her Premier Business Impressions from before we were married, but for 1999 is when they caught it. Then what this is all about here is a piggyback onto the IRS audit. So that's what this whole thing is about. Now, the Franchise Tax Board came back in 2006 and sent us a letter saying that we were going to do this. And in 2006, we were still married, and at that time, Sharon did have multiple accounts, and she was still getting mail and bills under Gilbertson, which is neither here nor there, but that's just a fact of the case. So there's thing that wasn't really actually thing. I am not asking for a refund from the state of California for any of this. This is all stuff that I paid of Sharon's, other than the time involved coming back, because on the proceedings, on the request for the appeal, her first statement is, I do not dispute I owe the tax for 1999. I do not dispute I owe the tax for 1999. What I do dispute is the penalty and the interest that has been assessed. On that 2006 letter tells you what the assessments and the penalties are going to be. So that's not a surprise. But in my world, once somebody admits that they're their taxes and solely their taxes, then it's a moot point. Why I was requested I requested innocent spouse. They asked me questions, had me send in documentation, and I sent in everything that I had that was available. I have hidden nothing, and if there's something they need, you need, whatever I have, I will give you. I have absolutely nothing to hide. So when it says we were separated, she left. She just walked away, which is fine. In closing, I'd like to add that I understand that my business that resulted in the additional taxes, however, he greatly benefited from profits of my business. And in the paperwork, and that's what I was getting at earlier, is that I showed that during our marriage, according to her tax record, she had a loss of $50,000, more than $50,000. So I did not benefit anything from her business. And in the court records, she did go on to say, because I told her I paid her back for everything, including the country club, including the truck, everything was paid back. The money that was, well, we'll get to that later. Anyway, on NS-25 in the hearing exhibits, that's the list of things that I kind of went through and tried to make it pretty concise and simple. So if we could kind of go through those, I'll go through those really quickly, just my quick point. The number one is she admits that they were hers and only her taxes. And on the third, I don't have the third page on that, but where I was granted innocent spouse. Number two, there's a premarital audit. So in 98 and 99 is when the tax examination came, and that documentation there, those numbers, should be sufficient for Curry to figure out what the IRS was piggybacking on or what they were asking for. Number 3 is a previous list of Sharon Gilbertson's previous taxes from 96, 97. There's $22,000 there, actually $27,000 there. And then it shows in 97 that she was still married to Stephen Gilbertson at the time, so I don't know how I should be responsible for those. And in 90, the third page shows $22,000 in taxes owed by Sharon E. Gilbertson, not by Sharon and Steve, by Sharon herself, so that's a separate one. And then there's a levy for Bank of the West for $22,000 from the California State Board of Equalization. So there's a history of tax fraud with Sharon. Number 4.
Can I just interject? I'm sorry. We talked about this at the pre-hearing conference, that these allegations of fraud, unless we're going to explore this, I object. There's no evidence of fraud. I doubt that Mr. McDaniel even knows how to establish that there was fraud. It's only meant to disparage Mrs. McDaniel, and I objected all of this talk about the fraud.
We have great levity as far as what evidence we admit. We appreciate your objection. We are going to overrule it. We're an administrative agency. We will take it in and examine it for its probative value to determine what weight to give it. But as it goes towards equitable relief, we see that there is some legitimacy that it could be relevant, so we will take it in and review it when we make our determination. But thank you.
Okay. Section number 4 shows my pre-Sharon history of zero fraud and no reason to cheat on my taxes. It lists my 1040 or my whatever tax refunds are, where I made sufficient money, I paid sufficient taxes, and there was never a question, there was never a lien, there was never anything other than somebody working hard, earning their money, and paying their taxes. Section 5 is a list of my 1099s for the time we were married. So it shows I was making really good money. I was fortunate. I was blessed to work in a place that paid me commission, and I worked my butt off because I wanted to do well. And I averaged probably $120,000 a year there. And my taxes are shown on all of them. There's never any hint of needing to pay anything else. Everything was paid exactly. So I am innocent of any tax fraud in that. Number 6, I know this is really obscure, but it's just like, here's a set of check scans from Sharon, and it goes from a check from $9.99 to the end, it's a check to the Internal Revenue Service for $5,953. Okay, that is not the issue. The issue is that she is proving to somebody that she paid taxes that she did not. And at that time, for 1998, if she didn't have that money to pay those taxes, how did those taxes get paid? I ended up paying them. So it's not the check fraud and the wording. Okay, number 7 shows that there's no possible way that I could have benefited from her business while she lost over $50,000 in those years, along with the previous tax liens and along with the theft from her ex-husband, which I'll show in a moment. There's no possible way I could have gained anything, and I didn't. During the time we were married, I made probably over $800,000, and I walked away from the marriage with nothing, a foreclosure, and debts, and obviously continued tax issues. In 98, she lost $93,000. In 99, that's listed on the Social Security, just so I'm not skewing anything. So $20,000 was her year 2000. 2001 was she lost $19,000. And then her Social Security statement shows that she claimed no income for the next 10 years. Interesting. But it does show in 99 that she made really good money. But the combination of those years, along with the things that I paid, there is no possible way that I could have benefited from anything. Number 8, we received letters for the audit from the IRS because there was tax anomalies or tax fraud anyway. So that is a letter saying that they're going to come out and inspect us, and they said get all the paperwork ready. And Sharon got all the paperwork ready, and she was found that her business had committed mistakes, errors. And now she says she doesn't, it's an honest mistake. And at the time it wasn't an honest mistake. It was whatever it was. Number 9, this undeniably shows that Sharon knew about the proposed tax lien. She was getting the mail all the time because there was so much more stuff and deceit going on at the time. Dates 2006 claims Sharon not to know anything about this tax lien. It cannot be the truth because it's right here with this. How do I have all this information? I was working 12 to 14 hours a day. Sharon was a stay-at-home mom. The only thing I asked during the entire marriage, and it was a rough marriage from day one, the switch flipped the day we got married, and I wish I would have got it annulled, but I did not. But the only thing I asked of her was to take care of the taxes, because after the 98 taxes, I knew there was tax inappropriations, or however you want to call it, but I was not going to be a part of that. So in not doing, I refused to do the taxes, so our taxes weren't done until I was court ordered by the judge to do them. Obviously, they would get done, so I had probably 20 garbage bags of receipts that I had given to her that she had requested, but she just refused to do them. She was better than that than to do the taxes. Number 10, this is where she had stolen money from her ex-husband, and the only reason that comes out is just another part of if she has to steal money from her ex-husband in November of 98.
And I again object.
It's signed documentation that she did that and that she paid him back after I was married.
How is Mr. McDaniel in a position to know what happened between Mrs. McDaniel and her ex-husband?
Look in your document, excuse me. If he was to look in the documentation, he would see that she agrees to pay Stephen the amount of $57,000.
I'm gonna let you. Sorry, don't want to overtalk each other here because we have a stenographer trying to keep track of everything that's being said. But I will allow your testimony, Mr. McDaniel, as to the events as you see them and the evidence that you presented. I'll allow that to be in. So thank you, Mr. Ricari, for the objection overruled. And please continue.
And that just shows that it was paid after we were married, and that she used him as part of the draw. The hardest part of this whole thing is I was going through these tax things and finding things, and it was breaking my heart every day. Then I found out the statement of identity where I found out that she was married in 98, and it just about killed me. She had a nice story earlier that in April that we met after that. It was long before that. She said she'd been divorced for a year and a half. I think I said 2 to 3 years in the first paperwork, but it was. I looked back and it was a year and a half. If I would have known she was still married, I wouldn't have dated her, and I certainly wouldn't have married her the same year. So it's everything is just really difficult. Number 12, at the bottom of the sheet, you'll see that there's numbers written in Sharon's handwriting where $17,796 went to 1999 taxes. That was my money from my return, from my making incredibly good money and actually changing my deductions so we could pay her back taxes. I didn't gain anything. I never betted anything except heartache and a loss of $800,000 or over more. Number 12 shows specifically how her tax liens were paid by me. You can see the IRS transcripts that I had to get for the divorce, and there was never a question with the IRS and how I paid their taxes. Probably the fourth page of number 13, it lists as page 2 of 3. You can go down and you can see halfway down the page, you start seeing these negative numbers, and those were liens that were taken from my business for her personal taxes. Number 13 also shows the tax liens from the state of California from 96, 97, 98. And then number 13 also shows a tax lien of $22,000 for an account for Sharon for her business from Premier Business Impressions. Not from David McDaniel, not from David and Sharon, but from Sharon McDaniel, Premier Business Impressions. Her business prior to us being married. I've never been audited. I've never been charged with fraud before I ever married her. And there's just pages and pages of that. And so I honestly, I don't understand how she's not in jail. If I committed those numbers of fraud, I guarantee you I would be punished. And for her, just because she's a woman and then she can sneak onto the next guy and steal from him, that's wrong. In her knowing, and we're human. We have a 20-year-old child, and we're human to each other. Sometimes we get frustrated, but I asked her, I said, Sharon, why are you doing this? I said, you admitted to it. You know it's your taxes. She goes, because I can. Because she can. She can create all of us wasting all of this time because she can. I'm sorry. I'm sorry that you guys have to spend your time listening to me ramble through a bunch of past stuff, but this is a 20-year-old tax. A 20-year-old tax. And I paid the IRS. I paid the $20,000 for the IRS when they audited us. I gained nothing. I benefited nothing. So in doing that, in asking her, so then I put a bill together for the time that I've spent putting paperwork together and my flight, my stuff. So it's not for the state of California. I mean, whoever allowed the appeal to continue on, that's, the Board of Equalization. And I tried to go through that system there, and it's just like it's basically not available online or anywhere. But anyway, why did it continue to go on is my biggest question. And then, as Mr. Curry said on the last page, these are just specific liens that I paid of Sharon that was just absolutely undeniable. Okay, just a couple more things. Sharon claimed that she did not know about the taxes.
To let you know, Mr. McDaniel, you have about 2 minutes left.
Perfect, thank you. In the divorce decree, which is number 4 on your list, on page 5, in 2003, the parties were audited by the IRS for a tax return they filed for the 99 tax year. To the best of Sharon's recollection, the audit resulted in an additional tax obligation of $18,000, of which a substantial portion was related to Sharon's premarital business promotions. That debt was paid during the marriage from the parties' tax refunds and other marital income. I gave the judge absolute, direct, undeniable facts of tax documentation, and that wasn't good enough. But if Sharon said to her recollection, then that made the paperwork good.
I'm sorry to interrupt again. Could you just tell me what page that is?
That's page 5.
Divorce decree, page 5.
Okay, thank you. I apologize.
No worries. And so she says that I owe her $20,000, and from the court judgment. Well, nothing's finished with the court yet, because my son was 18, and I honestly thought she would go to jail for her tax fraud. But this is not a tax fraud case. I am not here to say that she's committed fraud. I'm not here to prove it. I can absolutely undeniably prove that she committed tax fraud for many years, but that's not why I'm here. I'm here to prove that I am an innocent spouse, and in doing so, some of the stuff of the fraud had to come up. So the last thing is I'm not sure where it came in the paperwork, but the judge ordered me to pay her $20,000 number came from can't think of the word, but anyway, from the value of the house. The value of the house was $235,000. We were $60,000 in arrears, and we stopped paying for it in '99 because she was making more than I was at the time, and she would not put a penny towards the house, and she would not pay for anything at all. So at that point, that's when I got a separate account, and then I realized that there was a whole lot of money going missing. And so the $20,000 is ludicrous from the judge, and I gave her this this is part of the court documentation. Thank you for allowing me to testify and try to show that I am completely innocent and to show the character of her throughout our marriage. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. McDaniel. Mr. Curry, you do have a chance now to ask questions of Mr. McDaniel. Do you need a short break before you begin?
It looks like Ms. McDaniel would like to ask some questions. Should we do that after the break?
Let's go ahead and take a break. She can forward the questions to you so that you can ask them.
Okay.
Right.
Okay.
Okay, so we'll take is 5 minutes enough for her to send the questions to you? You want 10?
Should be fine.
5 minutes?
Fine, yes.
Okay,
Thank you, Judge.
5 minutes. We'll go off the record and take a break.
signatures. I'm sorry. Oh, okay. Oh, okay.
Would you like a few more minutes, Mr. Curry? Or are you ready? Oh, not a problem.
Let's see. Okay, I think I can attempt to wade through some of these responses, questions.
Okay. Let's go back on the record. And before we go to questions, I just want to clarify. Mr. McDaniel, you mentioned an amount around $20,000 that was in the marriage dissolution document.
Yes.
And I think I have it here on the bottom of what is page 8 of that Exhibit 4. It's $20,083.49. Does that sound accurate?
No, I don't know that there was a absolute number on it. I was just looking on the first page of the board proceedings. Which I don't know is her reply to the appeal, or I guess her original number to the appeal.
I think it's appellant's appeal letter.
Yeah.
Okay. Is that the non-requesting taxpayer notice where she filled out answers to questions?
I think it might be the letter dated April 14th,
Yes.
2016. This is appellant's appeal letter.
Okay, thank you very much. Okay, thank you. All right, let's turn now to Mr. Curry. You have up to 10 minutes to ask any questions about factual statements made by Mr. McDaniel.
Okay, so these are statements or questions about, I think, that correlate to the numbered assertions Mr. McDaniel was making a moment ago, or a few minutes ago. Okay, so first, with regard to the issue of benefit versus responsibility, Mr. McDaniel has no problem when there were huge refunds that came.
This is a question, sorry, for Mr. McDaniel, is that correct? Rather than a statement.
Not exactly. Let me see if I can rephrase it as a statement, or as a question. Okay, let me hold off on that.
Right. You will have a 5-minute closing at the end in case you
Okay.
want to try to tie up any loose ends.
Okay, so one question she has is whether or not Mr. McDaniel has proof that he paid the liens issued by the Board of Equalization. And the reason for the question is that these, some of the liens apparently that he mentioned, that Mr. McDaniel mentioned, were for sales tax to her business and paid through her business. It did not have to do with, I'm presuming it does not have to do with the relevant tax return of income tax.
Okay. Sounds like there might be two questions there. Do you want to ask the first question?
Okay, so is there evidence of that the liens that you paid, Mr. McDaniel, paid the liens that were issued, I guess, issued by the Board of Equalization?
No, she took she stole all of the check information and all of the relevant paperwork like that. She took all of the check stubs and all the bank statements, and there was multiple bank statements, so I don't know where it was from. I do not have I do not have absolute undeniable proof. I just know that if you lose $50,000 and you pay out $400,000, you can't afford to do that.
And that second part of the question is more of a statement. Do you want to rephrase it as a question or move on?
So let me phrase it as a question. Do you dispute that those liens were that resulted from sales tax, or were the result of, I guess, non-payment of sales tax for her business through, and then they were subsequently paid through her business? Let me see if I can clarify. So the sales tax liens didn't relate to the income tax. And are you asserting, and do you have proof that you paid for those, which were her business liens? And she says were paid through her business accounts.
Can she prove that those were paid through her business account?
That's a question for her, and right now I'm asking you.
No, I don't have. No. As I said, she took all of the checkbooks and all the registers and stuff like that. She
and
just
you have all the tax returns.
I have all the tax crap. Yeah.
Okay, but not 1999.
I do have that.
Okay.
Do you want to ask a question if you had the document that you want?
Right. Okay. Let me come back to that. These are her questions, as best as I can tell. Okay. Going back to the topic of whether or not there was a benefit. Now, there's two types of benefits. That could be part of an analysis or not. A benefit in lifestyle, okay, a lavish lifestyle. In the case law, we see that a lavish lifestyle is an indication that someone ought to know that there's something going on with an error in a tax return. Okay, that is an indication, maybe not conclusive. But another benefit would be in the tax return itself. So business losses. I mean, I know people who I might be going a little far afield.
I think we're going more into anecdotes. Let's try to focus the questions a little bit.
There are circumstances where a business will open another business that will maybe lose some money so that the main business, which makes a lot of money, say in a fishing season, for instance, would have losses to reduce the tax liability, right? So that's another type of benefit. So all the losses that you're talking about, now I'm getting back to her question, all the losses you're talking about would be one kind of benefit that relates to the tax return, but her question is related to the sort of, if you want to say lavish, I don't know if that's an overstatement, lifestyle, but paying for the truck, paying for the golf club. What about the Oakland Raiders season tickets? I've never had them. I don't know if those are expensive, but I guess they probably are. Who paid for those?
Sharon paid for she had the season tickets through her things, and in the divorce decree, I questioned whether I paid her back on everything else, and it was, and the judge documented that also.
And
So the only thing is in question is the season tickets for the Raiders, and yes, I was a Raider fan, but she had those, and we had a child, and we got rid of him. I didn't benefit anything from her business, nothing.
But you did go to the games.
I went to.
You had to enjoy the games.
I went to maybe 6 games. Not worth $800,000.
Okay, let me see if I can nail down a couple other questions here.
And to answer your question, a lavish lifestyle or anything else, if somebody actually loses money, somebody's got to pay for that money that's lost, unless you're just making it up. And if you're making it up to the Franchise Tax Board, I don't know if that's legal or not. So to answer your question, yeah, baloney. I did not benefit anything. And I did not live a lavish lifestyle.
Okay. I don't see anything else that I can quickly and concisely put into a question, so I apologize, Sharon, if I blow it. I think that's all the questions that I have from Ms. McDaniel for Mr. McDaniel.
Okay. Did you have questions yourself for Mr. McDaniel?
Oh, yes, thank you, I do. Just a couple. So, Mr. McDaniel, there was a long delay between the issuance from FTB of the NPA Notice of Proposed Assessment, that was in 2006, I believe, for the 1999 tax year. When and how did you discover the innocent spouse relief benefit?
Every time I get, and I got lots of them, every time I get a letter from the state of California, the state of Montana that I live in now, or the IRS, I call them immediately. And if it's my responsibility, I figure out payments, I prove that it's not my responsibility, or I take care of it. In 2015 or 16, whenever this started to come to a head, I got a letter. I called the Franchise Tax Board or the Board of Equalization, and I said, I don't know this. This is from my ex's thing, and I have nothing to do with it. And the judge put a line to where I got screwed on everything, and she got, bells and whistles for everything. So I drew a line myself. So that was not my responsibility. And Sharon, in her opening statement and in her things, says she doesn't dispute those are her taxes. So that came, to answer your question, in 2015 or whenever it came to a head, whenever I got a tax lien or bill, that is when I called. And when I did that, then I said, that's not mine. And then they told me what I had to do. And then I went through the system, the program, and I filed for innocent spouse, and I filled all the paperwork that was required of me that I had. And I may or may not have had the 99 taxes at the time, the whole form at the time. I have what the IRS gave me, probably 40, 50 pages of what they were looking at. I don't know what it is. Never paid attention.
Okay, so you began the innocent spouse program with in relation to the assessment issued in 2006 for the 99 tax year. But
I didn't do that until 2016.
Right.
When all this, April 14th of 16, when she received that, I think my documentation, which I don't have with me, it's in my file, but I don't know where it is. But as soon as I got a tax lien from the state of California, I called and took care of it.
Okay. And you talked about a lot of other tax liens. And did
Yes.
you call at that time and ask about those other tax liens in years? What years were those? When did they start?
The tax liens, most of those were prior to our marriage, but they were dated after we were married. So They were 96 and 97, but if you look at the date, it was after we were married.
Okay, but you were getting notices and the liens were issued, or you were getting collection notices regarding those liens in the period of what, 2002, 3, 4, 5, 6?
I don't think we really started getting them till maybe 2005 or something, because we were living here and everything was pretty good. And then when we sold our property in Exeter to move to Montana because my son was sick all the time, that's when we had a big capital gains. And I knew that it was capital gains, so I actually wouldn't have to pay the taxes. But I was getting tax bills for $500 and something thousand for years, and I still stuck to my gun. Sharon, this is your deal. You take care of our taxes. That's the only thing I'm asking of you.
Okay,
and she refused to do that.
Sorry, we're getting just a little off topic. What I'm curious about is when you received those notices, and they were at least around the time period of at least 2005. And did you call in and find out, why didn't you discover the Innocent Spouse Relief Program at that point? No one told you about it?
I didn't
when you
care.
called in?
I was married. It's just like, hey.
But did you know about it, that it was an option?
No. No, as a matter of fact, I would have never, ever put her name on my taxes ever. If I would have known. When I got married, it was you're married or you're not. It wasn't, you didn't have a choice to be claimed independent.
Okay, but the way that you discovered it was because FTB told you. Or how did you learn about that there was such a thing as the Innocent Spouse Relief?
I don't know if I looked it up online or if the state of California told me. I don't recall.
We've gone a little bit over our 10 minutes, but I'll
Okay.
allow you a couple more minutes if you have
Okay.
some questions to catch up on.
So you said earlier in your testimony that you never had a lien, there was no issues with paying taxes, you worked your rear end off, and all of that. But what about the tax liens and collection activities that were issued to you by the state, by the Franchise Tax Board? These are the representative samples of collection activities, and in FTB's exhibit, I think it's F, and they're all addressed to you. Are you saying that none of these taxes are yours?
Not necessarily. Just because they're addressed to me, they could be Sharon's completely 100%, or they could possibly be mine. We were married till 2010, so all of our taxes would be together at that point in time. But that little snake, she had the judge go back and change it to where we were separate. So she drew a line. So
Okay,
if you
that's
ask
fine.
me,
Now you're into the divorce decree issues, and I don't want to get in there, at least not yet. But I'm just staying focused on the collection activities.
what year are you asking for? That's all.
Okay, yeah.
And I can give you a better answer.
Okay, well.
Excuse me, can I interrupt for a second? To clarify with respect to these, the documents that are in Exhibit F to FTB's opening brief, Mr. McDaniel's name is the only one that shows on them, but they have been redacted, and it may be that Ms. McDaniel's name is also on them and has been redacted. I don't know, but that's a possibility, and I just wanted to advise the panel and the parties of that.
Okay. It may be that it's not. In fact, it's probably more likely that it's an address. I believe OTA regulations allow or require personal information like addresses to be redacted in information that goes out to the public. Why would Ms. McDaniel's name be redacted if it's her tax liability? What this suggests is that it's not.
All right, thank you. We can continue.
Okay. But getting back to the issue of the tax liens and this representative sample of collection activity. You have said that the 2015 notice that you received instigated your discovering somehow, I either through FDB telling you that, although FDB states that they didn't send out notices with their collection letters, and therefore the statute of limitations of 2 years did not go into effect. Okay, so those are two different statements, right? So they're saying they didn't inform you, at least not through written letters that came with the notices.
What is your question?
And what you're saying is, I think I forgot my question now, to be honest with you. Okay, so okay, you said that you first learned of the Innocent Spouse Relief Program in 2015 after getting a notice of a tax lien that you didn't think was yours. But you got other notices in 4 or in other years, much earlier than that, and you could have, if you had inquired, gone through the same process and discovered the Innocent Spouse Relief Program at that time. You say you didn't want to, or you didn't consider doing Innocent Spouse Relief because at that time you were married, but Innocent Spouse Relief is available to married persons just as it is, although maybe a different subdivision, just as it is available to unmarried persons. So could you have discovered, if you had inquired earlier than 2015, why didn't these other notices cause you to inquire about that program?
We hadn't done our taxes for, say, at least 8 or 9 years. No tax. You asked me a question. Let me answer it.
My question is, why didn't those notices?
Make sure we don't talk over each other.
Okay. Why didn't those notices trigger a response to learn about the program?
Because I went through and I had what I had as far as tax information. Like I said, I had a bunch of garbage bags that I had to go through and figure out what was what. In 2005, I submitted my tax returns in the best possible way because I was getting pressure from the judge, and you can read that in the documentation. And it was not complete. I did not send in all of the write-offs and all the information that I had. It was all the information I had at the time, but I was on a time frame, and so I had to do that because I was going to get, whatever by the court. So I came back for 2005 and 2008 and 2009. I believe my individual taxes, which are no longer part of Sharon's magically, I have additions and changes that I need to make. And I did it within the period of time of my tax return, but not within the year. So there's still a lot of tax fighting and a lot of tax hassles that I still have to live the rest of my life with because of Sharon.
Okay. So again, with your statement, you never had a lien. That doesn't appear to be true. There was no issue with paying your taxes, but Exhibit F, page 11, shows that there's an order to withhold personal income tax. That sort of comes after several other steps in the collection process. And another FTB exhibit, I think N, was submitted later, is the brochure about how to enter into a payment agreement, if my memory serves. So why could you not have gone into a payment agreement rather than waiting until it gets into a withholding situation?
Because they were Sharon's taxes, and I don't want to pay Sharon's taxes anymore. I was financially raped by Sharon, and the IRS does not care about anything. They want their money. And so I got liens. The Franchise Tax Board is a little more humane, and they sent letters, and they're more lenient, but it's just they start putting numbers on your house, the IRS, and those are the things that I went by most importance.
Okay.
You would never believe what went on. Never.
Mr. Kirby, we're at 20 minutes now.
Question?
One question, please.
Okay, one last question. And this is what you mentioned earlier. You do have the tax return, the 99 tax return.
The majority of it, yeah.
Okay.
And I just came.
Have it?
What's that?
Can we have it?
Sure.
Well, it's a little late now. How long have you had it?
I found the majority of it last week, but I have what came from the IRS, and that's a 30-page or 40-page thing, and that's all that you guys really needed to know because that's all the information that was
okay.
That this whole thing is based on.
Thank you, Mr. McDaniel. Franchise Tax Board, did you have any questions for Mr. McDaniel?
No further questions.
All right, let me turn to my panel. Judge Lund, do you have any questions?
Yeah, I have questions. Mr. McDaniel, I'm going to take you back also to 2000 when the 1999 return was filed. So as Ms. McDaniel had testified, you guys, when you were ready, made an appointment with the accountant and went to meet with him, and when the accountant was ready, he contacted you. Is that correct?
Not necessarily, sir.
Okay, so tell me what, in your view, what happened in 2000 regarding the 1999 return?
I don't know. I've never been super prompt on my taxes. I don't cheat, and so I don't have to play a game. If I have to make an extension, I get an extension. For that year, I don't recall what happened, but I was never in a hurry, so it wouldn't be something that was rushed or because of a pregnancy or because of something else. That would not have happened.
Okay, but do you remember when the 1999 return was ready to be filed? Did you meet and have a discussion with the account?
I don't recall.
And
I just remember the IRS coming to our house.
And when did the IRS come to your house?
I believe it was in 2001. I think the judge said 2003, but I think it was actually 2001.
Okay.
And that's in my documentation also in the last set of the FT where the pages are the NS 25. I believe it's in there.
Okay. You talked about being contacted by the IRS because they were examining your prior year's returns. When IRS sent notices, were they sent to you, to Ms. McDaniel, to both? How were those notices sent to you?
They were sent to me, but I knew they weren't mine because we're to the small business, and there's another name for it, but it's on the sheet. But it's because of small business or self-employment, and I was employed getting W-2s at the time, so I knew they weren't mine. But as I said, the IRS is pretty brutal, and if you claim together, you're liable together. And so I was thrown under the bus on all of that.
So who handled that exam? You, the accountant?
We were both there, and the IRS came to the house, and they asked for certain documentation, and they had a long list, and they gave us 4 months to prepare for it. And they came to the house, and then they found discrepancies where she had paid her sister for 98, which isn't, I don't think, a question here. I think we're only talking about 99, and then 99 had some discrepancies where she had written off things multiple times. But I don't think that if there was any issues before that they would have come up, but I think there was a consistent pattern, and so I was a good target, and I was making good money, so it was easy to collect.
Okay, thank you.
Good. Judge Jose, do you have any questions?
Yes, hello. So when were you aware that she had past tax liabilities before 1999? Was it during 1999?
No. Prior to us getting married, we were supposed to get married on the 1st, but we got, in the state of California, we were getting married out of state, so we adjusted the piece. Thanksgiving, before we were to get married, I get a letter saying that she hasn't been real honest with me, and that her business isn't what she claimed it was, and she has back taxes. And I asked her, and she said $20,000 or $30,000.
This letter was from Mrs.
From
McDaniel?
From Mrs. McDaniel,
Okay.
yeah. And we talked, and we cried, and we figured it out, and just said, we'll go forward. Well, it wasn't $20,000 or $30,000. It was hundreds of thousands. And and I didn't know about the taxes until I started doing the taxes to answer your question. I knew there was something before because of the letter I got on Thanksgiving before we got married in 1998. But the numbers that I see now just flabbergast me. Now I know where my money went.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. and move on to Franchise Tax Board. You'll have 20 minutes to provide your arguments.
Thank you. Good afternoon. In this case, Mrs. McDaniels has failed to show that FTB erred in granting her former spouse, Mr. McDaniel, innocent spouse relief for the 1999 tax year. There are three forms of innocent spouse relief under California Revenue and Taxation Code Section 18533 that I will be addressing today. The first is traditional relief under Section 18533B. The second is separate allocation relief under Section 18533C. And the third is equitable innocent spouse relief under Section 18533F. A taxpayer only needs to meet one of the forms of relief to be granted innocent spouse relief and does not need to meet all three forms. In its initial review, FTB erred by not considering Mr. McDaniel for relief under Section 18533B or C. Upon further review of those subdivisions, Mr. McDaniel qualifies independently under B and C as well as Section 18533F. There have been a lot of submissions and testimony about each of the spouses' failure to comply with various obligations. However, many of the documents and assertions are not pertinent to the determination of whether Mr. McDaniel is entitled to innocent spouse relief for the 1999 tax year. Therefore, I will go through why Mr. McDaniel qualifies independently for innocent spouse relief under Section 18533B, C, and F. Mr. McDaniel is entitled to relief under Section 18533B, traditional innocent spouse relief, because he satisfies all five requirements. First, Mr. and Mrs. McDaniel filed a joint tax return on April 15th, 2000. Second, in her appeal letter, her non-requesting spouse notice, and her testimony today, Mrs. McDaniel admits that the understatement of tax is due to a business that she independently owned and operated during the 1999 tax year. Contrary to Mrs. McDaniel's assertion, Mr. McDaniel also meets the knowledge requirement. The knowledge requirement analyzes whether the requesting spouse knew or had reason to know of the item giving rise to the understatement of tax at the date the return was filed. In this case, Mr. and Mrs. McDaniel filed their joint tax return on April 15th, 2000. Exhibit M to respondent's opening brief shows that the IRS opened its examination on January 31st, 2002. The IRS examination focused largely on the cost of sales deduction claimed on Mr. and Mrs. McDaniel's joint tax return. As stated in Ms. McDaniel's appeal letter, Exhibit J, the non-requesting spouse notice, and in her testimony today, she made a mistake in relations to the bookkeeping of her separately owned business. Exhibit G to respondent's opening brief is Mr. McDaniel's request for innocent spouse relief. In Exhibit G, Mr. McDaniels testified that he had an arrangement each party had an arrangement to report their own income to the CPA. Mr. McDaniels allegedly reported his W-2 income to the CPA, and Ms. McDaniels reported her separate business income to their CPA. Contrary to the assertion made by appellant's representative today, page 5 of Exhibit G states that after 3 years, Mr. McDaniels asked Mrs. McDaniels about the tax returns, and she became very defensive, and argumentative. The crucial portion when looking at the knowledge requirement is what happened when the return was filed, which is April 15th, 2000. Therefore, it is irrelevant what Mr. McDaniel said 3 years later and whether or not that indicates that he should have known regarding the deficiency. FTB has attached all documents that were submitted during the innocent spouse review, and it has not concealed or withheld any documentation from the record. Based on the evidence before this panel, Mr. McDaniels did not have knowledge of the deficiency at issue at the time the joint return was filed on April 15th, 2000. Mr. McDaniels also meets the fourth requirement because it would be inequitable to hold him liable for a deficiency that is solely attributable to Mrs. McDaniel. Finally, as stated in FTB's additional brief, Mr. McDaniel's application for innocent spouse relief was timely under Section 18533B and C. Accordingly, Mr. McDaniel meets all of the requirements and independently qualifies for relief under Section 18533B. Turning to Section 18533C, separate allocation relief. This provision would only be relevant if the Office of Tax Appeals determines that Mr. McDaniels is not entitled to relief under Section 18533B. Mr. McDaniels meets the first requirement of separate allocation relief because he and Ms. McDaniels were divorced prior to him filing for innocent spouse relief in June of 2015. Secondly, IRS Treasury regulation pertaining to separate allocation relief, unlike traditional and equitable innocent spouse relief, places the burden on the taxing agency to show that a requesting spouse had actual knowledge of the deficiency at the time the joint tax return was filed. In this case, as stated previously, there is no evidence that Mr. McDaniel had actual knowledge of the deficiency.
Specifically, with respect to the knowledge requirement under C, this is unlike what it is under B or F. Under B, the burden is on the requesting spouse to show he didn't know or have a reason to know of the item that gave rise to the understatement. Under C, so as soon as the requesting spouse establishes that he was single or separated the requisite amount of time before requesting relief, that a valid joint return has been filed, and also establishes how much of the deficiency assessment is attributable to the non-requesting spouse, at that point, the burden of proof shifts to the government to show that the requesting spouse had actual knowledge of the item that gave rise to the understatement. And in this case, we know that that item is the disallowed cost of goods deduction that was reported on the Schedule C business operated by Ms. McDaniels. And 18533C conforms to Internal Revenue Code Section 6015C, and the IRS promulgated Treasury regulations to interpret that section. Specifically, Treasury Regulation 1.6015-3 discusses the relief by separate allocation and directs that with respect to the knowledge factor, when the item that gives rise to an understatement is an erroneous deduction, as it was here, that knowledge of the item means, quote, knowledge of the facts that made the item not allowable as a deduction, end quote. And in this case, the fact that made the item not deductible, the cost of goods, a certain portion of them not deductible, was, according to Ms. McDaniel's testimony today, a duplication of submission of certain invoices for both the 1998 and 1999 tax years. She has stated it was an oversight on her part. She wasn't aware of it. The tax professional to whom she gave the information did not identify it as an issue. If it was her business and she was not aware of the duplication of the submission of certain invoices, it is simply the case that the government, in this case FTB, cannot show that Mr. McDaniels had actual knowledge of the reason that the deduction set out on Schedule C was incorrect. He wouldn't have known. If Ms. McDaniels, whose business it was, didn't know, certainly Mr. McDaniel would not have known that certain invoices had been submitted for both and used for both tax years.
Based on what Ms. Money has said, the actual knowledge requirement under Section 18533C has been satisfied. The third.
No, I will correct that. FTB cannot show there is actual knowledge because to get C relief, as long as the requesting spouse establishes the valid joint return and the portion of the deficiency that's attributable to the non-requesting spouse, then the requesting spouse is entitled to relief under C unless the government can establish actual knowledge. And in this case, FTB can not establish that actual knowledge. And Mr. McDaniels, for that reason, qualifies for relief under C. And he is deemed, by the way, to have elected relief under B, C, and F simply by the nature of the form FTB uses for its innocent spouse request, Form 705. It's one of the exhibits, I think maybe F or G, to our opening brief, because FTB advises the requesting spouse on that notice that he or she will be considered for relief under B, C, and F as appropriate.
The third requirement also has been met under separate allocation relief under Section 18533C. As admitted in her appeal letter and in the non-requesting spouse notice, the deficiency arises from Ms. McDaniel's separate business that she owned and operated during the 1999 tax year. Accordingly, even if the Office of Tax Appeals finds that the requirements of traditional innocent spouse relief under Section 18533B have not been met, Mr. McDaniel should still be granted separate allocation relief under Section 18533C. Mr. McDaniels also qualifies for relief under Section 18533F, equitable innocent spouse relief. Section 18533F would only apply in this case if the OTA determines that Mr. McDaniels is not entitled to relief under Sections 18533B and C. Relief under Section 18533F should be granted if, after taking into account all the facts and circumstances, it is inequitable to hold Mr. McDaniels liable for all or part of the deficiency arising from the joint return. Section 18533 is patterned after the federal innocent spouse statute. Thus, it is appropriate to look to federal guidance when determining when to grant innocent spouse relief under Section 18533F. IRS Revenue Procedure 2013-34 lists non-exclusive factors for granting equitable relief, but the revenue and procedure states that no one factor controls that determination. Ms. McDaniel's representative today asserts that Mr. McDaniel significantly benefited from their relationship during the 1999 tax year. However, significant benefit is only one of the non-exclusive factors to be considered when evaluating when a taxpayer is entitled to equitable innocent spouse relief. Mr. McDaniel, the revenue and procedure also doesn't look at the significant benefit as a whole, as whether it benefits one of the requesting spouse during that relationship. Rather, it looks more narrowly and looks significantly whether the taxpayer, the requesting spouse, significantly benefited from the understatement of tax. The understatement of tax in this case resulted in an additional tax assessment of roughly $3,800. There's a U.S. tax court decision that is on point in regards to this, the amount that's potentially at issue, and that is Howder versus Commissioner. In that case...
Can you please, just spell the first name in that case?
Yes, sure. And I'll give the citation. Howder is H-O-W-E-R-T-E-R versus Commissioner. It's a United States tax court decision, and I believe the citation is, the docket number is 27079-12S. And in that case, the U.S. tax court found that there was, that in evaluating the significant benefit factor, that a deficiency amount of approximately $2,900 was too small to weigh either way whether or not the requesting spouse received a significant benefit and weighed that factor as neutral. The court in that case divided the assessment between both of the spouses and found $1,450 to be the amount of the unpaid tax to be too small to allow either spouse to enjoy a significant benefit, and that is why the court in that case determined that the significant benefit factor should be weighed as neutral. In this case, similarly, the additional tax that is owed is roughly $3,800. Once divided between the two parties, I believe it is roughly $1,700. And similar to the Howder case, the significant benefit factor should be weighed as neutral. In this case, equitable innocent spouse relief under Section 18533F should be granted. The deficiency at issue is solely attributable to Ms. McDaniel, and further, Mr. McDaniel did not know or had no reason to know at the time the joint return was signed about the deficiency from Ms. McDaniel's separate business. Accordingly, for the tax year at issue, it would be inequitable to hold him liable for a deficiency he did not cause nor know about at the time the joint tax return was filed. Yes.
With respect to the other balancing factors, because Revenue Procedure 2013-34 sets out 7 balancing factors, and we describe them in greater detail in our opening brief, but just in general, the marital status factor weighs in favor of relief. The knowledge factor weighs in favor of relief. The tax compliance factor weighs in favor of relief. And the 4 remaining enumerated factors, economic hardship, legal obligation, significant benefit, and health, are neutral. In other words, there's not a single balancing factor that weighs against relief. And we have not identified any other additional specific facts or circumstances, which when you think of April 15th, 2000, at the time in April 15th, 2000, when he filed the return, or any circumstances since then that should weigh either in favor or against relief for Mr. McDaniel in this case. But the listed factors alone are sufficient to establish, as Mr. Coutinho explained, that Mr. McDaniel is independently entitled to relief under F if the office determines that he is not otherwise entitled under either B or C.
Just in conclusion, FTB's position is that it correctly granted relief under Section 18533B, Section 18533C, and Section 18533F. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, so we have the testimony, and we have asked questions of the witnesses. We now have all the legal arguments as well. At this time, I will give time for the judges if they have any questions regarding the parties' positions or legal arguments. Judge Hosey?
No questions, thank you.
Judge Leon?
A couple of brief ones for Franchise Tax Board. The Ms. McDaniel had indicated that she never got notice of the granting of the innocent spouse relief to Mrs. McDaniel. So did the Franchise Tax Board send a notice of this process to her, or how does that process work?
I believe Ms. McDaniels did receive a notice of action granting innocent spouse relief, and I believe it is attached to her appeal letter as I believe it is Exhibit 1 of Ms. McDaniels' appeal letter.
So the first time she will ever get notice of it is when you've done your intake on Mr. McDaniel's application, and you've made your decision, and that's the first notice she gets?
No. She received a non-requesting spouse notice. I believe the notice is dated, and it's Exhibit 2 of appellant's appeal letter. It was dated November 19th, 2015, and that would, I believe that would be the first time Ms. McDaniels received notice of Mr. McDaniel's innocent spouse request.
And at that point, can she intercede to provide information to you to not grant the relief requested?
Yes, Ms. McDaniels did respond to the non-requesting spouse notice with statements
Okay,
regarding to her claim,
very good.
regarding to Mr. McDaniel's claim.
Great. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. So to clarify that, FTB will send notice to the non-requesting spouse at the same time it sends notice of granting to the requesting spouse. Is that correct?
In regards to the notice of action, yes. That is correct.
And they're notified at that time, the non-requesting spouse, that they can protest that determination.
Yes, they can appeal that. It gives them appeal rights to appeal before the Office of Tax Appeals.
Excuse me, Judge Johnson, did you ask if the non-requesting spouse has an opportunity to respond before FTB issues its notice of action?
Before the notice of action, well, I was looking at the
Revenue and Taxation Code 18533, and I would have to double check the subdivision, prohibits FTB from making a determination on an innocent spouse request less than 30 days after giving notice and opportunity to participate to the non-requesting spouse. And in this case, FTB did that, and Ms. McDaniel did participate. She wrote back to FTB and provided her statement.
And that was prior to the notice of action being issued?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. For Franchise Tax Board, you mentioned at first when you went over subpart B of 18533, concluding that it was timely. Can you explain sort of with what makes that timely based on all the liabilities and all that?
We need the additional brief.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yes, as stated in its additional brief dated September 29th, 2017, FTB, the reason why that provision, the statute of limitations under Section 18533B and Sections 18533C, it's not applicable is because respondents' collection notice do not advise taxpayers of their right to request innocent spouse relief. So respondents' collection activities do not trigger the 2-year statute of limitations to request innocent spouse relief under Sections 18533B and Section 18533C.
Okay, thank you. I'm going to ask Mr. Curry a question. I believe you were asking questions about sort of statute of limitations and jurisdiction as well. Did you have anything to add about whether a claim under B or C would be timely under these facts?
I have nothing to add on that topic. Thank
Okay.
you, though.
Thank you.
Let me withdraw that. No, the outcome would be the same. Never mind. I don't. Thank you.
All right, thank you. I did have one final question. Mr. Curry, if we were able to provide an additional 30 days for the 1999 tax year return to be provided to you and provide additional briefing, do you think that would benefit your position in this appeal?
Yes, I do.
Okay. And Mr. McDaniel, you said you do have the return for 1999. You will be able to provide it to all the parties?
Yes.
Okay.
I have the majority of it. I mean, I may not have every page of it. My W-2, I think my W-2's here, so I don't know what got separated or not, but I definitely have the IRS sheet that is huge, that shows all the documentation of any question of the financial liability.
Okay, thank you.
I don't know what you would be looking for there. I mean, as far as specifics, if there's specifics, I may be able to help. So,
thank you. Any more questions from the panel? All right, we can.
I have a couple questions for FTB, if that's permitted.
We don't ask questions of just legal argument. Only questions are reserved for witnesses who are sworn and testifying as to facts.
Right. I know this is unusual, but in a sense, Mr. Coutinho has prepared he's not making, how can I say this? He's prepared the report the same way that this Innocent Spouse Program has prepared a report. So in that sense, I'm not questioning his legal judgments. I want to question how the report came about with missing information. And does FTB have the information? Does that make sense?
So these questions are relating to what information they had when they made their determination?
In part, yes.
Why don't you go ahead and ask the question, and
Okay.
we can deflect it back to FTB if we need to.
Okay. So, oops, wrong question. Okay. This might be a little. With regard to, where are the documents? Okay, so did Mr. McDaniel provide any documents to FDB to make the decision initially? The Innocent Spouse Program, did they receive any of these benefits? And if not, how could a determination be made without them?
Okay, let me go ahead and you can answer that question as well. But sort of just generally, what documents did you have or FTB have when they made the determination?
As stated previously, respondent attached to its opening brief all documents it received during the innocent spouse, Mr. McDaniel's request for innocent spouse, Mrs. McDaniel's non-requesting spouse notice, and the information that they provided. It's all in our opening brief.
We also may have relied on information we had concerning their return. For example, Exhibit A to our opening brief is the return information display that we have because at the time the request was filed, we no longer had the 1999 return. It had been purged per FTB's retention policy. So we would have relied on information set out in Exhibit A, Exhibit B, Exhibit C, Exhibit D, Exhibit E, and then which were all in-house documents concerning this tax year account, in addition to the information that both Ms. McDaniel and Mr. McDaniel submitted to the Innocent Spouse Unit. We have included all they submitted as Exhibits G and H to FTB's opening brief.
Just one more note. The one document that was the Innocent Spouse Unit did not have was the appellant's appeal letter that respondent also used in making its determination that in which she admitted to the deficiency. Correct.
I apologize. Can you clarify what was that last part?
Appellant's appeal letter.
Well, we wouldn't have had that when we made the decision because the appeal letter was filed in response to the notice of action having been issued.
Right.
Oh, is that what you're trying to say?
All right, thank you. Let's proceed on to closing statements. Franchise Tax Board, let me just give the instructions to everyone here that the closing statement is going to be short. I think we projected 2 to 5 minutes for these statements, similar to Mr. Curry's opening statement. You will not be introducing any new facts or arguments. You'll just reiterate your strongest points concisely and give us the key evidence that supports your position. You do not need to run through the whole list of evidence. There's a lot here. So just the few key points and the few key arguments are going to be ideal. And just conclude after 2 to 5 minutes with the result you would like this panel to find for. We'll begin with Franchise Tax Board if you have a closing statement to provide.
We rest on our argument, and we have nothing else to add.
Okay, thank you. Mr. McDaniel, you'll have 2 to 5 minutes to provide any closing statement if you would like to, or you can just rely on what you've provided so far as FTB did.
Just a quick closing statement that Sharon does not dispute that they're her taxes on her letter to the first initial letter and on her opening statement. I never disputed making an accounting error. So she's taking responsibility for those taxes being hers. And I think I showed without a reasonable doubt that I did not benefit from her business or her taxes or anything from her. So I don't see how that I could not, well, it's up to you, but I feel that I'm a very, very incredibly innocent spouse in this case. Thank you.
Thank you. And Mr. Curry, do you have a closing statement you'd like to provide?
I do. Thank you, Judge. First, I'll just be honest with you. I think Mr. Catino's brief is excellent. It's very, he goes right down each one of the relief options, and I mean, it's very articulate, very excellent. I just think the FTB is very generous in its interpretation and its acceptance of Mr. McDaniel's statements. There's no evidence he established his lack of knowledge. He admits that he knew that there were at least potential for problems. The heated discussions or whatever, however we want to characterize it, that is a signal. That is in the case law. This issue of knowledge, I'll come back to that. But it's not what the question of knowledge, what he knew when he signed it. Okay. It's not what he said 3 years later about what he knew. He said in the application for the 1999 tax year relief that there was some, that he both did know and did not know. Okay. That statement was in the 1999 relief application. Whenever he said it, it applies to the 99 tax year. Part of the evaluation of a subdivision F relief analysis, tax compliance and hardship. I don't know that Mr. McDaniel has made any claims as to hardship. I think he's given an opportunity, and I don't know that anything has been made of that. But with regard to, but it's clear that he's paying expenses that could go to tax liabilities. But with regard to the tax compliance, FTB's analysis of this is very, very generous. Mr. McDaniel has tax liens for many years after 1999-2000. And those tax years after that, notices of liens, some of those are after he was filing no longer as a joint taxpayer. I don't know if that makes sense. And the judge in the divorce decree was, it seemed to me, was a little bit frustrated with him not having filed his tax returns in the same position that appellant is now in. You can't make decisions about settlements without having the documents. That does not comport with this idea of complying with tax regulations or tax obligations, tax filing obligations. That's a very generous interpretation by FTB in Mr. McDaniel's regard. Again, on the topic of knowledge, the notices from FTB, they say, do not contain information with regard to opportunities for relief under the Innocent Spouse Program. But eventually, Mr. McDaniel did discover that program, and he is now trying to take advantage of it. There's nothing wrong with that. But the reason he discovered it was because of a notice that he received. He received many other notices many years earlier and could have had the same reaction. He could have discovered this the same way he did in 2015, in 2005, or any of the years he received other notices. with regard to specific knowledge, it's from Price v. Commissioner. This is a Ninth Circuit case. A spouse has, quote, reason to know, end quote, of the substantial understatement if a reasonably prudent taxpayer in her position at the time she signed the return could have been expected to know that the return contained the substantial understatement. Now, there's evidence suggesting that it wasn't discovered until after the audit. Factors to consider in analyzing whether the alleged innocent spouse had reason to know of the substantial understatement include the spouse's level of education, spouse's involvement in the family's business and affairs, the presence of expenditures that appear lavish or unusual when compared to the family's past levels of income, standard of living, and spending patterns, and the culpable spouse's evasiveness and deceit concerning the couple's finances. I don't know what Mr. McDaniel's level of education is, but as a taxpayer, he clearly is no novice. He's very aware of the advantages of, for instance, offsetting the gain on the sale of his house with Mrs. McDaniel's deductions. He had his own business. He was not just a wage earner. The presence of expenditures that appear lavish or unusual. Lavish expenditures doesn't cover just the amount of the California adjustment, which is $3,800. The entire adjustment was $18,000. That's a huge mistake at this income level. And the amount of money that she spent through her businesses on things like tickets, football tickets, paying off his truck, the golf club membership, that's well in excess of $20,000. That's well in excess of 20% of Mr. McDaniel's gross income. That's not a small amount.
If you had just a couple more key points to wrap up the next minute or two.
Okay. Again, touching on the knowledge requirement. It sounds very cut and dry. You read the regulation or the statute. Does he have knowledge or not? Well, at some level, you have to rely on what the party is telling you, and both parties have different stories. FTB is being very generous to Ms. McDaniel's statements and have flat out rejected Ms. McDaniel's statements. With regard to knowledge, a requesting spouse has a reason to know of an understatement if he has a duty to inquire and fails to satisfy that duty. The requesting spouse has a duty to inquire when he knows enough facts to put him on notice that such an understatement exists. I'm sorry. I should have given you this is from Work v. Commissioner. I'll give you the citation. In such a scenario, a duty to inquire arises, which, if not satisfied by the requesting spouse, will result in constructive knowledge of the understatement. I think FTB is making the knowledge issue too black and white. If every spouse who didn't want to have to pay his or her fair share of the taxes or wanted relief, they could just say, I didn't know. Who's going to prove them wrong? How do you know what's in somebody's head? The question is, was there an opportunity to know that a taxpayer had a duty to inquire based on some red flag, if we'll call it that? Something in their life surrounding the taxes should have or could have indicated a problem, and once that is indicated, they have a duty to discover it. They can't just turn a blind eye and expect to be relieved. I'll give you those citations after I'm done, if that's all right. Mr. McDaniel's position and FTB's position would grant relief to the taxpayer who benefited the most from the deductions. Think about that. Is that equitable? Mr. McDaniel had the most income for those 2 years, and any deductions benefited him the most. Talk about the Code of Federal Regulations 1.615-3. Example 3 illustrates how to allocate the benefit. And there's no evidence that FTB tried to allocate. This is a perverse outcome of of innocent spouse relief. The person who benefits the most from the deductions keeps those benefits. The person who benefits least because she had lesser income has to pay the entire penalty. That is a perversion of innocent spouse relief. And a lot of this information, let me be more specific. The information with regard to the revision for the state assessment. I was looking back at Mr. McDaniel's reference to page 5 of the divorce decree, right, where the judge says that the
I think we're getting a little too deep into argument here.
Right.
It's just supposed to be closing statements, not new case law, not new contentions. So if you can't just wrap it up in one more sentence,
Okay.
that'd be great.
So, in one sentence, 2 parts. FTB has been very generous to Mr. McDaniel's assertions, which are not backed up by evidence. The evidence that is in the record at least suggests, that if he did not know, he had an opportunity and therefore a duty to inquire, and failed to do so on many occasions. Okay, and both to FTB and to the divorce in the divorce settlement. The reference is not to the California assessment; it's to the federal assessment. So it was not addressed. And the reason for that probably is because we don't have any documents. And if FTB had the documents, they say they turned everything over. I believe them, but how could they make that assessment, that determination with no documents? The most relevant documents. The divorce decree, which they asked him for, and the 1999 tax year. That is truly remarkable.
Thank you, Mr. Curry. We have your evidence and arguments in your briefs, as well as your testimony and arguments today. Appreciate that. Thank you very much. Certainly appreciate everyone that has come here today, or even if you had to appear telephonically. I know several people came from long distance away, so we do appreciate that. We do have the outstanding issue about the 1999 tax return and whether we should request that or not, and whether there's benefit to this appeal. I want to confer with my panel on that, so we will hold the record open while we confer after the hearing. I'm not going to make everyone wait around while we try to decide that issue, but we will issue a post-hearing order, which will either close the record or dictate when the record will close based on a request for additional evidence or a briefing. This concludes our hearing on this appeal, and the judges will meet and decide the case. We will aim to send both parties our written decision no later than 100 days from the date that the record is closed. And with that, we are now off the record. And this concludes our hearings for today, and we are adjourned. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So as I